Hey photographer, Jessica Whitaker here, and today I am so excited to announce that I have launched my photography business podcast. It's called Build and Bloom and it's available on all platforms. Before I get into some details on why I decided to start a podcast, what's going to happen to my YouTube channel, let's talk about what the podcast actually contains. This podcast is photography business, but it's not what you might expect. The guests on the show are not just photographers. I have a film director who is going to be sharing the process of making a movie. There's a financial advisor who she's going to be coming on the podcast and talking about finances pertaining to your side hustle. It all circles back to photography and it's going to be a very well-rounded podcast. Of course, I have photographers who are going to be guests on the show too. The first guest actually is a photographer, my friend Champagne, who runs a photography studio in downtown LA, and she's going to be talking about the process of opening up a photography studio, but not just the inspiration behind it, the actual logistical steps that she had to take to get from a dream to unlocking the front door. I also do solo shows too, and there's actually 6 episodes already out that you can listen to. So some of the episodes include how social media influencers make money and 7 ways that you can too. Even if you don't want to be a social media influencer, there's things that you can pull from their income streams and incorporate into your own business. There's an episode, these are all live right now, on why people in your town won't pay your rate, and a 4-part checklist of how you can raise up the prices. Another episode that's up is 4 things that you can DIY when you can't afford to outsource yet in your business. You can listen to the 6 episodes that are currently live right now. Just search Build and Bloom Podcast on your preferred platform. Each podcast episode has a practical approach to it. Even the guests that I have on the show, I want them to share their story, but paired with action steps that you can take. Because it's great to listen to how somebody got to where they're at in their career and a bit about their journey, but how can we actually pull practical steps that can move your dreams forward and turn them into goals? I am so excited about this podcast, and it really goes by the pillars that I have in my business for Build and Bloom: empower, educate, and encourage. Now let's talk about the change in the YouTube channel and what I'm going to be doing moving forward. I've evaluated my YouTube channel and I've found that the videos that perform best are reviews on camera equipment and behind the scenes tutorials. However, the videos when I'm sitting down talking about an aspect of photography business, they don't do as well, which is understandable. I feel like a podcast is the more appropriate platform to sit down and talk about logistics of business. It just makes sense. And YouTube videos, really, you can only hold somebody's attention for about 5 to 8 minutes, whereas a podcast is a longer format. My episodes are at least 30 to 45 minutes long. I'm really excited to have a place where I can dive into a little bit more detail on topics within a business and things that I don't necessarily think would suit an online workshop. I do have my online photography workshop and a pricing workshop. My masterclass, the online photography business workshop, is 6.5 hours of video content. However, topics about how to distribute your work across platforms, how to bring somebody from a YouTube channel to your Instagram account, from your Instagram account personal to your professional Instagram account with your photography work, that doesn't really make sense to have in a workshop for my business and what I teach. The podcast is a perfect place for me to talk in a longer form about these topics that can help you grow your photography business. But guess what? My YouTube channel has been tutorials and reviews for the past few months, so nothing is really changing here. Instead, we're just creating another outlet where I can teach you. Honestly, this podcast isn't just for photographers. Anyone interested in creative media can listen and pull something from it. However, most of my audience are photographers, so it makes so much more sense for me to call this a photography podcast. So tying this together, I actually created my first episode that went up last May 2019, but the podcast was under the name Joyride, which is such a cute name, but it has nothing really to do with the business that I've built. Build and Bloom makes so much more sense, and Build and Bloom is a photography community. With Joyride, and that's the first 6 episodes that are currently on iTunes, still under the Build and Bloom name, but was called the Joyride podcast, I really did try to pull as many examples for other small businesses and people in creative media, but I found myself just continuing to give photography examples. So while I do believe it can apply to most people with a small business or who work in creative media, and that is what I tried to create with Joyride, I stepped away for a few months, and here we are now, we're relaunching it as a Build and Bloom photography podcast. I hope that that all makes sense, and I'm really happy that I'm able to kind of dive into detail here on YouTube for anyone who is interested in why the name changed from Joyride to Build and Bloom. And Joyride, again, still such a cute name, and I ended up naming one of my story mask filters on Instagram as the Joyride filter because it's very cute, but Build and Bloom makes so much more sense, right? And for those who don't know, I do have a photography Facebook group called Build and Bloom, and this is now in correlation with the podcast as well as the Build and Bloom Instagram. And Build and Bloom is one of Facebook's largest and most engaged photography communities. It's free to join, and I'll have the link for the Build and Bloom Facebook group down below. It's coming together, right? Oh, it does make more sense for her to have the Build and Bloom podcast when she has a Build and Bloom Facebook group rather than Joyride podcast and everything else is branded as Build and Bloom. I'm also excited to do some shows where I talk about what I did before I became a full-time photographer in 2017, my jobs when I worked 9 to 5. I've been working since I was a sophomore in high school, and I was in e-commerce for 8 years, and I've learned so much about customer service through my e-commerce job, through my job at being a social media director in-house and being a social media manager, freelancing, and doing coaching calls with a variety of businesses and influencers to grow their social media presence and to strategize with them. And the podcast is such a great place where I can share those details about my career that wouldn't necessarily make as much sense here on YouTube. I always want those who are watching to walk away feeling encouraged and inspired and empowered. I don't want them to just think, okay, that was great, good for Jessica or good for the guest, but how does this apply to me? I want every episode to have practical action steps because it's not all about me. If it was, I wouldn't be teaching. It's about the education and the value that I can bring to you. You can find the Build and Bloom podcast on your preferred platform. I love iTunes and Spotify, but if you do listen on iTunes or if you have access to iTunes and you listen on a different platform, I want to talk about the importance of iTunes reviews for a moment. If you have access to iTunes, maybe you listen on Spotify, but you're enjoying the podcast, pop over to iTunes and leave a review there. Or if you're already on Apple Podcasts, easy as that. Whether it's for my podcast or any other show that you listen to, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of leaving a review and why your reviews matter. When you leave a review, it pushes out the podcast into the algorithm and shows up on people's recommendation. Now, there's really not that many podcasts on photography, and so when you take 60 seconds to write a review, it helps more than you could know. I would say it's like, this is unofficial, but I would say it's like the equivalent of having 30 comments on an Instagram post. It's going to boost it up in the Instagram feed. That's kind of what it can do, at least in my mind, and that's the easiest way I can explain it. Very unofficial, and that's not a fact. It's not proven, but it is important. So if you enjoy the Build and Bloom podcast or any show that you're listening to, make sure to pop over and drop a review. That's why in shows, the hosts remind you at the beginning or at the end to take a moment to leave a review, but I thought that I would explain it a bit more in depth here. When you are consuming content for free, especially in the education space, it's so important to show it some love because you don't know how long it will last without it. If a creator, an educator, is putting out free educational content that helps you grow your business, it will help them be able to expand their education business by providing you with more free tools and resources. So dropping that iTunes review is so, so important. I am so excited for the Build and Bloom podcast. Search Build and Bloom on your preferred platform to listen and to learn. You can also join the Build and Bloom photography Facebook group. It's free, and you can follow me over on Instagram at Jessica Whitaker for more daily tips and tools and resources for growing your photography business. My YouTube isn't going anywhere, so be sure to hit subscribe and click the bell to be notified when a new tutorial for your photography business comes out. All of my social media works together, but there's different free content and tools on each platform that I have. Lastly, let me leave you with this question and let me know in the comments below. Would you like me to do an episode where I walk you through how I create podcasts? I know that a lot of members of the Build and Bloom Facebook group have been talking about they want to start a podcast or a YouTube channel, especially with a little bit of the extra time that they might have in quarantine. So let's say a photo shoot was canceled for them and the photo shoot was 4 hours long. They now have 4 hours to put into a project. If you would like me to do a video on how I create my podcast, let me know in the comment down below. With that being said, I believe in you and your business. I'll see you in the next video, or I'll see you over on the podcast. Bye.